The most dangerous prison in Texas, America, Bloods, Crips, and gangs. The day the unit went silent. The fight started with a sound no one ever forgets inside a Texas maximum security prison. Silence. Not yelling. Not metal doors slamming. Not officers running. Just silence. In the most dangerous prison in Texas, a place known for tension between Bloods, Crips, and several other violent gangs, silence is the biggest warning anyone can get. It means something is about to happen, and nobody wants to be standing in the wrong place when it does. On that hot summer morning, the inmates in C Block suddenly stopped talking. Cards dropped in the day room. A broom rolled out of someone's hand. Even the officers felt it, that heavy feeling in the air, like the whole unit was holding its breath. A Bloods shot caller slowly stood up from a metal bench. Across the room, a Crips leader did the same. They stared at each other. No words. No threats. Only that silent message. It's time. And before the officers could reach them, before anyone knew who made the first move, everything exploded. But to understand why that moment happened, why the unit went silent, why rival gangs were suddenly ready to risk their lives, you need to know what life is really like inside one of Texas's most dangerous prisons, a place where survival depends on who stands with you and who stands against you. Welcome to the unit. Texas has many prisons, but this one, the unit at the center of our story, has a reputation that even inmates fear. It's the type of place where the moment you walk in, you're judged. Not by officers, not by counselors, but by other inmates. The Bloods, the Crips, the Mexican gangs, and the white prison groups, they already know who you are before you even step into your cell. Word travels faster inside than it does outside. New inmates describe their first day the same way. Like stepping into a boiling pot that never cools down. The sound never stops. Metal clanking, people yelling, dominoes slamming, officers shouting orders. Every corner has eyes watching you. Every table in the chow hall has assigned seats you didn't choose, and you better not sit in the wrong one. This unit is divided by colors, alliances, and old beefs from the streets. But the officers? They try to keep order the best they can. Still, they can't be everywhere. They can't hear everything. They can't see everything. And everyone inside knows that. That's why even small things, a look, a word, a rumor, can become a spark that spreads fast. Just like the one that led to the silence before the explosion. The rules you never see. Life inside the most dangerous prison in Texas doesn't run on paper rules. It runs on unwritten rules, rules made by gangs, passed down by old heads, enforced by whoever has the most influence on the unit. No one hands you a rulebook. You learn by watching. Or you learn the hard way. Rule number 1, you must belong to somebody. In this prison, being alone is more dangerous than being with the wrong crowd. If you don't join a group, gangs assume you're weak, and weakness is hunted. New guys quickly find out they have 3 choices. Stand with your race. Stand with your neighborhood. Stand with nobody, and hope you survive. Most inmates don't like gangs, but in this place, gangs are protection. They control the phones. They control the tables. They control the showers. They control movement. And they notice everything. Rule number 2, respect isn't asked for, it's enforced. Inside these walls, disrespect is the biggest fuel for fights. Even a small mistake, bumping into someone, staring too long, sitting at a wrong bench, can start something big. Not because of pride, but because every gang believes they must respond. If they don't, they look weak and another gang might test them. So even when an argument is small, the reaction is big. Rule number 3, officers keep order, but they can't stop everything. Officers try. Most of them work hard to keep peace. But this prison has hundreds of inmates, and only a handful of officers on each wing. If something goes wrong in the day room, and officers are busy on the other side of the unit, it takes time to respond. And in that time, which might only be a minute, anything can happen. That's why inmates say, the real law is the one made by us. Rule number 4, beef never dies inside these walls. Some Bloods and Crips had issues on the streets before prison. Some had fights in county jail. Some fought in other prisons. When they meet again inside this unit, it's like pressing play on a paused problem. And the older inmates know this. They try to calm the younger ones down because they know how fast things can explode. But sometimes, the tension becomes too heavy to hold. For weeks, officers noticed both sides whispering more. Meetings in the day room. People checking the walkways more than usual. A few arguments in the chow hall. Nothing big enough to lock the unit down, but enough to make everyone nervous. A storm was building, and it was only a matter of time before someone made a move, or before something pushed both sides over the edge. That moment came on a day that started just like any other, but ended with the entire unit on lockdown. The spark that started it all. The day everything exploded didn't begin with a fight. It began with something small, something so simple that officers almost ignored it. A stolen phone call. In this unit, phone time is controlled by gangs. The Bloods had the early morning slot. The Crips had the late afternoon slot. Everyone knew the schedule. But that morning, a young Crip, barely 21, new to the unit, walked to the phone during the Bloods' time. He wasn't trying to start trouble. He just wanted to talk to his mom after not hearing from her for 2 weeks. He picked up the phone, dialed the number, started talking softly. A Bloods member spotted him, walked over, stood right next to him. "Get off the phone," he said quietly. Not loud, not angry, just firm. But the young Crip didn't hang up. He turned a little, covered the receiver and said, "Give me a minute." 1 minute. That's all he asked for. But in this prison, that was too much. The Bloods member stepped closer. He tapped the phone. Tapped it again. A signal. Everyone in the day room froze, because they knew what that meant. The young Crip slowly hung up, but he stepped back without apologizing. That one small detail changed everything. The message spread fast. Within an hour, the Bloods shot caller heard about it. Then the Crips leader heard about it. Both sides felt insulted. Both sides wanted respect. Both sides wanted to respond, not violently, but firmly enough to make sure no one tried that again. At first, the plan from both sides was simple. Talk it out. Keep it respectful. Handle it like men. But prisons are unpredictable places. And this one had something else that made things worse. Rumors. By noon, people on both sides heard different versions. He disrespected him. He pushed him. He spit on him. He cursed him. None of that actually happened. But inside prison walls, rumors spread faster than truth and hit harder. Before long, the young Crip wasn't just the guy who stayed on the phone too long. He was the guy who challenged the Bloods in their own territory. And that had to be answered. At least, that's what everyone started saying. The unit gets tense. Officers notice things changing. People sitting in tighter groups. Whispering in corners. More eyes watching the walkways. Less talking, more staring. Even inmates who weren't in gangs stayed in their cells, keeping their heads down. When the air changes inside a prison like this, everybody feels it. The older inmates tried to calm the younger ones. It was just a phone call. Don't let this turn into something big. Y'all don't want another lockdown. But it was too late. Both sides had already made up their minds. Something was going to happen. It wasn't a question of if, only when. And then came the silence. Right before chow time, when the officers opened the day room doors, the entire unit went quiet. Just like that, the Bloods shot caller stood up. Across the room, the Crips leader stood up too. Everyone else froze. Officers stepped forward, not sure what was happening, but knowing it wasn't good. And then, in 1 second that felt like an hour, someone made the first move. When everything erupted, the first punch didn't land loud. It wasn't a dramatic crack or a shout. It was a quiet thud, almost too soft for officers to hear. But inside a Texas maximum security prison, that sound is enough. Because once the first punch lands, everyone else moves. The day room explodes. The Bloods shot caller stepped forward. The Crips leader stepped in to meet him. They were face to face, not yelling, not arguing, but locked in that tense stare that tells everyone, this is it. Then a young Blood rushed forward. A Crip stepped up to block him. And the entire room shifted like a wave. Tables slid. Shoes scuffed. Bodies moved. And suddenly, both sides collided. Not everyone was fighting, most weren't. But it didn't matter. When two angry groups move at the same time in a crowded room, even one shove can turn into chaos. That's exactly what happened. Officers move in fast. The officers watching the unit radioed instantly. C-block disturbance. All available staff respond, now. Within seconds, boots were running down the hallway. Keys jingling. Doors slamming open. Commands echoing across concrete walls. Get back. Stop moving. Against the wall. But officers were outnumbered, dozens to one. Their goal wasn't to punish. It wasn't to escalate. It was to stop it before someone got seriously hurt. Pepper spray hit the air. Shields came in. Inmates backed up. Some dropped to the floor. Some kept arguing but didn't swing. Others raised their hands to show they weren't involved. But the tension? It stayed. Thick, heavy. Waiting. The fight was over. But the problem wasn't. The lockdown begins. Within 5 minutes, the entire wing was ordered into full lockdown. Doors slammed shut. Metal bolts clicked. Lights stayed bright. Food trays were pushed through slots. Every inmate knew what this meant. No day room. No phones. No recreation. No movement. Just you and your cell. Hour after hour. Some inmates spread blankets on the floor to pass time. Some paced. Some slept. Some stared at the ceiling. The whole unit was quiet again. Not because of tension this time, but because everyone knew something bigger was coming. When a fight between gangs breaks out, officers don't just separate people. They want to know why it happened, who planned it, and what else might be brewing under the surface. The young Crip who made the phone call was pulled out for questioning. So was the Bloods member who confronted him. So were the two leaders. But talking is rare inside a place like this. Inmates don't snitch even if they're innocent. Even if it was a misunderstanding. Even if they want peace. So the officers didn't get much. Which meant only one thing. The lockdown was about to get longer. And everyone started wondering, was this just a small fight? Or the beginning of something much bigger? The pressure builds behind the doors. Lockdowns in Texas prisons feel different from normal days. The noise disappears. The movement stops. The whole building becomes still, almost frozen. But inside the cells, the tension only grows stronger. For the first 24 hours, everyone expected things to go back to normal. Lockdowns happen all the time. A fight, an argument, a small incident, then life continues. But this lockdown? It stretched into the second day. Then the third. Then the fourth. That's when inmates knew. This wasn't just a fight. Something bigger was brewing. The whispers start. Even on lockdown, information finds a way to move. Notes slip under doors. People tap on walls. Some yell through the vents. Whispers travel from cell to cell faster than officers can stop them. Rumors started pouring in. The Bloods think the Crips planned it. The Crips think the Bloods set them up. There's going to be a hit when lockdown ends. Someone's bringing in more people. None of it was confirmed. But inside prison walls, rumors often matter more than truth. The older inmates knew this was dangerous. They'd seen small beefs turn into full-scale racial or gang wars in other units. They'd watched prisons shut down for weeks because two groups couldn't let something go. They understood what the younger ones didn't. A fight is one thing, but fear is worse. Fear makes people prepare for danger, even when danger isn't real. Inside the Bloods' tier. The Bloods were angry, but not about the fight. They were angry about respect. The shot caller sat on the edge of his bunk, listening to his guys talk through the doors. He disrespected us. He didn't get off the phone. We can't let that slide. But the leader wasn't focused on the young Crip. He was thinking about something else. What if this was a setup? What if the Crips tested them to see how they'd react? What if more was coming? He wasn't scared, just cautious. In prison, caution keeps you alive. He sent a message down the tier. Hold tight. Don't move reckless. We wait. Inside the Crips tier. On the other side of the unit, the Crips were having their own debates. Half of them felt the young Crip did nothing wrong. The phone rules were unfair anyway. The other half believed the Bloods were using a small moment to start a bigger problem. Their leader paced his cell, thinking. He didn't want a war. A war meant transfers, solitary confinement, years added to sentences. But doing nothing? That made the whole group look weak. And inside this unit, weakness is dangerous. He finally tapped a message back down his row. We don't start nothing. But we finish anything that comes our way. The officers see the pattern. Officers walked cell to cell, doing checks, asking questions. The warden reviewed the reports. Lieutenants stood in the control room, watching hours of camera footage. They saw something that worried them. Both gangs were calm. Too calm. They weren't yelling. They weren't arguing. They weren't throwing things or threatening officers. They were quiet, thinking, waiting. For staff, that was the most dangerous sign. A calm unit isn't a peaceful unit. A calm unit is a planning unit. Tensions hit a new level. By the 7th day of the lockdown, even inmates who weren't gang members were nervous. You could feel it in the air. Too many eyes watching. Too many secrets moving. Too many inmates preparing for something. Some made extra food from their trays, storing it for later. Some sharpened toothbrushes quietly at night, not to hurt anyone, but for protection. Some prayed. Some sat in silence. Everyone knew the same thing. When the doors finally open, something big might happen. The officers knew it. The Bloods knew it. The Crips knew it. Even the inmates who had nothing to do with the fight knew it. The question wasn't if something would happen. It was what and when. And the day the doors opened again was the day no one would ever forget. The doors finally open. On the 10th morning of the lockdown, something felt different. The officers' footsteps were faster. The keys jingled more often. The hallway lights flickered on earlier than usual. A voice crackled through the loudspeaker. Stand by for controlled release. Every cell went silent. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. And the moment everyone had been fearing. Locked doors protect people. Open doors test them. In this unit, after 10 days of pressure, rumors, and planning, no one knew what would happen once the day room filled again. The first wave steps out. The doors opened in small groups, 5 or 6 at a time, to prevent chaos. The first inmate stepped out slowly. They weren't smiling. They weren't rushing. They weren't talking. They were looking at faces, looking at tables, looking for signs, any signs, of what the day was about to become. Officers stood everywhere, by the doors, by the stairs, by the phones, by the showers. Their radios were clipped high on their shoulders. Their hands hovered near their spray cans. They were ready, and they knew the inmates were ready too. The Bloods moved first. A group of Bloods walked toward the metal tables in the far corner. This was their area, their usual spot. They moved calmly, sat down, folded their hands, didn't talk. But they weren't relaxed. They were waiting. Their shot caller remained near the railing, eyes scanning the room. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was looking for signals, anything that told him what the Crips were planning. Every gang leader knows this. You never act first unless you have to. The Crips arrive. A few minutes later, the Crips stepped out of their cells. Their leader walked ahead of them, calm, focused, expression unreadable. He glanced at the Bloods' table. The Bloods stared back. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was the same message both sides understood. Keep your people in line, or this gets worse. The officers sensed the tension instantly. They stiffened up, shifted positions, gripped their radios. One wrong move, one wrong word, and the whole unit could erupt again. The young Crip returns to the phone. Everyone watched as the young Crip, the one whose phone call started everything, stepped out of his cell. He didn't look scared. He didn't look proud. He looked nervous, but determined. He scanned the room. The Bloods watched him closely. Even inmates from other gangs paused to see what he would do. The Crip hesitated. His eyes flicked to the phone, the very phone that caused the problem. His leader nodded at him. Just once. The message was clear. Fix this the right way. Everyone held their breath as the young Crip walked toward the phone. Then stopped halfway. Turned. And for the first time since the lockdown began, he faced the Bloods table. The moment that could change everything. What he did next would decide. Or if violence erupted. If the day room stayed calm. Or if lockdown returned. If both gangs walked away. Or if a war started. The young Crip took a breath. Stepped closer to the table. Not too close, just enough. The Bloods shot callers stared at him. The room stayed silent. The young Crip spoke. My fault. Should have waited my turn. 6 words. Simple words. But in prison, simple words can carry huge weight. The Bloods' leader didn't blink. Didn't smile. Didn't look away. He just nodded once. A small nod, but a powerful one. From it, we're done here. And just like that, peace returns. The young Crip stepped back. Walked to a different corner. Didn't touch the phone. The Bloods didn't move. The Crips didn't move. The officers unclenched their hands. And the unit, for the first time in almost 2 weeks, finally breathed again. No shouting. No fighting. No explosion. Just a room full of men who knew that one decision had stopped something far worse. But the story didn't end there. Because even though the tension calmed, something else was happening behind the scenes. Something the inmates couldn't see. Something the officers were preparing for. Something that would affect the entire prison. The warden's decision. While the inmates slowly returned to their routines, the officers and administrators were having their own meetings. Meetings the inmates couldn't see, but would definitely feel. Inside the warden's office, supervisors sat around a long table. They had reports, videos, witness statements, and notes from officers who worked the tiers during lockdown. They weren't angry. They weren't emotional. They were focused. Because inside the most dangerous prison in Texas, even a fight that ends peacefully must be analyzed deeply. The video review. The warden clicked a button. Body cam footage and security camera feeds played across the screen. They watched the young Crip walk to the phone. They watched the Bloods member approach him. They watched the small argument that followed. They watched the room react. They watched the start of the fight. The warden leaned back in his chair. This wasn't a gang war, he said quietly. This was a spark. But sparks can burn down a whole unit. Everyone at the table nodded. They'd seen it before. Small misunderstandings turning into huge problems. Rumors turning into explosions. Tension turning into danger. They needed a plan, not just for now, but for what might come later. The surprise decision. The warden didn't want to punish everyone. He didn't want to push the tension higher. He didn't want this unit turning into a powder keg. Instead, he came up with a different move. Keep the leaders close, but keep the troublemakers apart. His plan: no mass transfers. No gang-wide punishments. No targeting specific groups. Just focus changes. Separate the young Crip who made the mistake, not as punishment, but for safety. Move the Bloods member who confronted him to a different wing. Place cameras in new angles around the phones. Adjust the phone schedule so time slots were clearer. A small reset. A clean slate. Nothing extreme. Nothing aggressive. Just enough to cool the unit down without causing new problems. Back in the unit, inmates noticed the change. That afternoon, officers appeared at 2 cells with clipboards. Inmate Jackson, pack your property. Inmate Ramirez, you too. The young Crip looked confused. He wasn't in trouble, he knew that. Officers were calm, not hostile. They moved him quietly to a different wing. He was safe. Out of the spotlight. Away from the eyes that might blame him for what almost happened. On the Blood side, the same thing happened. The member who confronted him was moved as well, not far, just far enough to avoid more tension. Both sides noticed. But no one complained. Everyone knew it was smart. The 2 guys who almost created a war were now separated. And neither gang took it personally. If anything, the move felt fair. Balanced. Even. A shift in atmosphere. Over the next 2 days, something surprising happened. The unit got calmer. Not friendly. Not soft. Just calmer. The Bloods still sat at their table. The Crips still moved together. Other groups still stuck to their corners. But the staring stopped. The whispering slowed. Even the officers noticed people were walking with less tension in their shoulders. Peace, real peace, was settling in. But what the inmates didn't know was that the warden had one more move left. A move that would directly affect the whole prison. A move some would agree with, and some would hate. The change no one expected. 2 days after the small transfers, the unit felt different. Not relaxed. No maximum security prison is ever relaxed. But stable, balanced, quiet enough for everyone to breathe. The Bloods weren't planning anything. The Crips weren't sending messages. Other gangs weren't choosing sides. For the first time in weeks, the prison felt like it was returning to normal. But inside the administration building, another conversation was happening. A serious one. Because even though the unit was calm, the warden knew one truth. Calm doesn't mean safe. Calm means waiting. He needed a long-term fix, something that would prevent another spark from turning into a fire. And after reviewing camera footage, paperwork, and staff input, he made a decision that would change how the entire prison worked. The warden unveils the new plan. The supervisors spread out across the unit, clipboards in hand, officers stepping in and out of tiers, inmates watching closely, wondering what was happening. Then the announcement came. Effective immediately, a new dayroom rotation schedule is in place. At first, nobody understood, until the details came out. The new rule was simple. Gangs would no longer be in the dayroom at the same time. Bloods got 1 hour. Crips got another. Other groups got their own slots too. Mixed groups would rotate last. It wasn't segregation by race. That's illegal. It wasn't punishment either. It was conflict prevention scheduling. The professional way of saying, we're keeping space between people who might hurt each other before something happens. The reaction inside the UNIT the Bloods. They didn't like the idea at first. Less dayroom time meant less time to use phones, cook spreads, exercise, or just breathe outside the cell. But their leader understood the move. He'd seen worse happen in other prisons when things weren't controlled. So he told his people, take the time they give us. Make it work. And they respected it. The Crips. Some of the younger Crips were angry. It wasn't even a real fight. We didn't start it. Why are we getting punished? But their leader shut it down fast. Use your hour. Don't make it harder than it already is. He knew something the younger ones didn't. The schedule protected them as much as it protected the Bloods. One small spark had already come close to burning the unit down. Another spark, even smaller, could be worse. The neutral inmates, the ones without gang ties, they loved it. No more walking into the dayroom during a tense standoff. No more guessing who controlled the phones. No more worrying about sitting in the wrong spot. The schedule made life easier, calmer, safer. The officers' reaction. Officers were relieved. The new schedule meant fewer surprises. Fewer chances of groups bumping into each other. Fewer, wrong place, wrong time, situations. They still watched closely. Still listened. Still stayed ready. But for the first time in a long time, they felt like the unit wasn't one step away from breaking. They could finally breathe. Just a little. But not everyone was happy. Deep in the back of the unit, one inmate sat on his bunk, staring at the wall. He belonged to neither gang. He wasn't part of the fight. He barely talked to anyone. But he knew something important. Something no officer, no gang, no warden realized. The spark between the Bloods and Crips wasn't the real danger. The real danger was something else happening behind the scenes. Something quiet. Something hidden. Something that had nothing to do with phones, respect, or dayroom time. He had seen it. He had heard it. He knew it was coming. And he knew that when it finally reached the surface, everything inside the most dangerous prison in Texas would change again. This time for real. The secret no one was watching. While the Bloods and Crips calmed down, while officers relaxed, while the warden felt his plan was working, something else was growing in the shadows of the unit. And the quiet inmate, the one who didn't belong to any gang, the one no one paid attention to, he was the only person who saw it coming. His name was Lamar. He kept to himself. Didn't gamble. Didn't borrow. Didn't join a group. Didn't talk much. And because he didn't talk, Everyone assumed he didn't know anything. But Lamar had one thing that made him dangerous without ever lifting a finger. He listened. What Lamar heard, long before the fight between the Bloods and Crips, before the phone argument, before the lockdown, before the new schedule, Lamar overheard something in the showers. Not from Bloods. Not from Crips. From another group entirely. A group that never caused trouble publicly. A group that stayed quiet. A group officers rarely mentioned. They were small, but organized, focused, patient. And they had a plan. A plan that had nothing to do with prison beef. A plan that had nothing to do with respect. A plan that had nothing to do with gang colors. Their plan was about profit. The real problem, a new operation. During showers one night, Lamar heard a conversation through the steam. We move it after lockdown. Phones are a distraction. Everybody watching them. No one watching us. The second voice whispered, "Good. Less eyes. More money." Lamar knew exactly what they meant. Contraband. Not weapons. Not phones. Something bigger. Something that could get people hurt. Without a single punch thrown. Someone on the outside, possibly a guard, possibly a visitor, possibly an inmate worker, was helping this small group bring something into the unit. And the Bloods Crips tension? The lockdown? The new schedule? It didn't stop their plan. It helped it. Because now, everyone, officers and inmates, was focused on the gang problem. Nobody was paying attention to the men who never raised their voices. Never got involved. Never caused scenes. The ones quietly getting stronger. Lamar tries to warn someone. Lamar wasn't a snitch. He'd never talk to officers. He'd never write a note. He'd never call out a name. But he also knew what this kind of contraband could do. It could start fights. It could cause overdoses. It could bring heat to the whole unit. It could start a chain reaction that made the Bloods Crips situation look small. So he tried to warn the only person he trusted. A calm, older inmate on his tier named Ray, someone respected by all groups. Ray listened quietly as Lamar whispered everything he heard. When Lamar finished, Ray didn't react with shock. He didn't yell. He didn't panic. He said, "Son, if what you heard is true, the whole unit's about to change again. And this time, it won't be over phones or pride." The first sign of trouble. 2 days later, right after the new dayroom schedule began, something happened that confirmed Lamar's fear. During an officer's routine search of a cell in G Block, they found unusual packaging, powder residue, small baggies hidden behind a vent, and a handmade ledger with names and numbers. It wasn't enough to charge anyone, but it was enough for the warden to realize a new operation was running inside his prison. And it had nothing to do with gangs. The Bloods didn't know. The Crips didn't know. Most inmates didn't know. But Lamar knew. And he knew that the more this operation grew, the more dangerous the entire prison would become. Because money changes everything. Money creates alliances. Money creates betrayal. Money creates violence faster than disrespect ever could. Something was coming. Something bigger than a gang beef. Something that would involve everyone on the unit, whether they wanted it or not. And it started the moment officers found that hidden stash. When money meets violence, the officers didn't know whose stash they found. The warden didn't know how big the operation was. The Bloods and Crips didn't know anything was happening outside their beef. But Lamar knew this was just the beginning. Inside Texas's most dangerous prison, trouble never comes loudly at first. It comes quietly. Slowly, patiently, and then all at once. The silent group makes their move. 2 nights after the stash was discovered, the quiet group, the one Lamar overheard, changed their tactics. They became bold. Too bold. Someone tried to move product during count time, a moment when every inmate must stay inside their cell, standing still, silent. It was sloppy. It was reckless. It was desperate. And it was seen. Not by an officer, not by a camera, but by a Bloods member who happened to be awake, standing at his door, watching through the narrow glass window. He didn't understand what he saw at first, but he knew this. Something was happening in his unit, and no one told him. That alone was a problem. A big one. Because in prison, nothing moves, not food, not phones, not favors, not contraband. Without gangs knowing about it, the news spreads fast. Within hours, word hit. Someone's running something behind the scenes. Not us. Not them. So who? The Bloods weren't happy. The Crips weren't happy. Even the Latino and white groups were confused. This wasn't about territory. This wasn't about respect. This wasn't about colors. This was about money and danger. And whoever controlled it was breaking the balance of the entire prison. The unlikely meeting. The next day, something rare happened in the yard. The Bloods leader and the Crips leader stood under the same tower. Not fighting, not arguing, but talking. The officers didn't interrupt, they watched. Everyone watched. Two men who almost tore the unit apart a week ago now stood shoulder to shoulder. Because they finally understood. The fight about the phone was nothing. The rumors were nothing. The lockdown was nothing. The real threat wasn't each other. The real threat was the unknown group controlling the new operation. As one of the leaders said, phones start fights. Money starts wars. Lamar's role becomes clear. That night, Ray, the older inmate Lamar trusted, approached him. He kept his voice low. "It's time to tell them," Ray whispered. "They need to know what you heard." Lamar hesitated. He didn't want to get involved. He didn't want attention. He didn't want trouble. But Ray laid it out plainly. If no one steps up, the Bloods and Crips will think it's each other. And you know what comes next. Lamar nodded. He'd seen prison wars before. He didn't want another one. So he told Ray everything again, every detail, every whisper, every voice he heard. Ray carried that message to the leaders. And for the first time, the entire prison understood the truth. The Bloods didn't start it. The Crips didn't start it. It wasn't about phones. It wasn't about respect. It was about profit, and a hidden group manipulating the entire unit while everyone else fought among themselves. The Warden steps in, just as tensions were about to explode again. This time between every gang in the unit. The Warden made the strongest move of the entire story. A surprise full unit sweep. Dozens of officers entered the building. Every cell searched. Every tier inspected. Every vent, pipe, and lock checked. The quiet group never saw it coming. Stashes were found. Notes were recovered. Smuggling routes were shut down. And the key players were quietly transferred out of the unit before anyone could retaliate. The operation collapsed overnight. The Bloods didn't need to fight. The Crips didn't need to react. Neutral inmates didn't get dragged into chaos. The Warden ended the problem before violence erupted. Just in time. The truth about Texas's most dangerous prison. Inside the most dangerous prison in Texas, people think the biggest threat is the gangs. The Bloods, the Crips, or whoever controls the yard. But this story shows something deeper. Violence doesn't always start with punches. Sometimes it starts with silence. A stolen phone call. Rumor. A disrespect. A hidden operation. In a place where survival depends on who stands with you, a small spark can burn down an entire unit. And yet, this prison didn't fall apart. But because sometimes, the people you expect to start trouble become the same people who help prevent it. A young Crip who apologized. A Bloods leader who stayed calm. A quiet inmate who listened. A warden who acted at the right time. In a world built on walls, tension, and survival, peace doesn't happen by accident. It happens because somebody decides to stop the fire before it spreads. And inside Texas's most dangerous prison, that small decision made the difference between a deadly riot and another day of life behind bars.